So what happens when one person just decides the rules don't apply to them anymore? Today, we're digging into two of literature's greatest rebels, each one fighting a totally different kind of war against the world that tried to box them in.
In one corner, we've got a man driven by a radical, dangerous idea he thinks just might change everything. And in the other corner, a woman whose rebellion begins with a secret, an act of love. Both of them break the law, but for wildly different reasons. And the fallout is, well, absolutely life-changing.
First up, let's meet Raskolnikov. He's this brilliant but desperately poor student in 19th century Russia. And his motive for what he does? It isn't money, it isn't passion. As he says himself, it's just about daring. It's about testing a theory. And maybe even more than that, it's about testing himself.
And then there's our second rebel, Nora Helmer. Now for her, the battle isn't about some grand philosophy. It's way more personal. It's about this urgent need to figure out who she really is, completely separate from her role as a wife, a mother, a doll in a world run by men.
And that brings us right to the heart of it all. How did these two characters end up challenging their societies, and what did they ultimately discover about the very idea of freedom?
Let's start with Raskolnikov. You see, his crime doesn't begin with a weapon. It begins in his head. It's this dangerous, almost seductive idea that takes root and grows in the darkness of his isolated little world.
And what a world it is. I mean, Dostoevsky paints this picture of St. Petersburg that's just suffocating. It's a feverish, grimy city, and Raskolnikov lives in a room that's described as a coffin. It's basically the perfect incubator for the kind of alienation and radical thought that leads him down a very dark path.
So what's this big idea he's obsessed with? He calls it the extraordinary man theory. The gist is, he believes that history is really driven by these exceptional people, like Napoleon, who have the right to step over the moral line, to transgress laws for a greater good. The crucial question that's eating him alive is he one of them?
So in his mind, he rationalizes the murder of a pawnbroker as this grand philosophical statement. He tells himself he isn't killing a person, he's killing a principle. But as you can imagine, reality turns out to be a whole lot messier.
You can really map his entire journey in these 4 stages. It all starts with the idea, which then leads to the brutal physical crime. But that's when the real punishment begins. And it's not from the police, it's from inside his own head. The guilt, the fever, the paranoia, it all becomes this inner prison. And it's only through immense suffering that he gets a chance at some kind of spiritual rebirth.
Okay, now let's pivot completely and talk about Nora, because her story is a whole different world. We're shifting from that dark, coffin-like room to a comfortable, respectable home. But don't be fooled. This cage, even though it's gilded, is just as confining.
Nora's world is this meticulously crafted dollhouse. Her husband Torvald calls her his little skylark, his squirrel. And these aren't just sweet pet names, they're instruments of control. It's all a performance of domestic bliss. But just beneath that perfect surface, she's hiding a secret that goes against the very foundation of this patriarchal world.
So here's the deal. Years earlier, to save her sick husband's life, Nora got a loan by forging her father's signature. Now this was an act of pure love and sacrifice, right? Well, in the eyes of the law, it also makes her a criminal. And this is the devastating realization she has when her secret finally comes to light. She sees that her whole life has been an act. She hasn't been a partner in her marriage. She's been a plaything, a doll for her father, and now a doll for her husband.
So both Raskolnikov's theory and Nora's secret were bound to come crashing into the light eventually, and the way each of them faces their moment of reckoning could not be more different. For Raskolnikov, the reckoning is an implosion. His mind just turns on him. He's tortured by guilt until he's finally driven to confess. For Nora, though, the reckoning is an explosion. It's a direct, fiery, verbal confrontation with her husband that shatters her reality and leads her not to a confession, but to a powerful declaration of independence.
Let's just break it down. Raskolnikov's transgression? A murder based on a theory. Nora's? A forgery based on love. His breaking point is internal torment. Hers is an external confrontation when the truth gets out. This all leads to a massive spiritual crisis for him and a radical assertion of self for her.
When Nora says she's leaving, Tolvard's reaction is so telling. He doesn't appeal to their love or their partnership. No, he goes straight to her sacred vows, her duties as a wife and mother as defined by their society. He's not just a husband in that moment. He is the voice of the entire social structure she is rejecting, a structure that sees her only as a role, not as a person.
So after breaking all the rules, where do our two rebels end up? They both find a kind of freedom, that's for sure, but they are polar opposites.
And here's the great paradox, right? Raskolnikov, the guy who wanted to be a law unto himself, finds freedom through submission, by surrendering to a higher moral order. And Nora, who lived her entire life in submission, finds her freedom by rejecting all external authority and asserting that her highest duty is to herself.
You can almost see it visually. Raskolnikov's path is vertical, a spiritual ascent through submission and faith. Nora's path is horizontal, a journey out into the world to create her own truth through reason and self-assertion.
So what's the bottom line here? What can we take away from this? Raskolnikov's journey shows us that rebelling against society can sometimes lead you right back to a higher spiritual law. Nora's story suggests that true freedom might require breaking away entirely to invent your own moral code. And in the end, both of them force us to ask a really tough question about where true autonomy really comes from. Is it found in the soul or in the self?
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. When you think about your own freedom, is it about shattering expectations and defining your own path? Or is it about finding a deeper principle, a higher purpose, that you can willingly submit to? As these two masterpieces show us, the answer is anything but simple.